The morning the story really begins, there was frost on the shop windows and 2 paper cups of coffee going cold on the fender of a school bus, and Levi Hartman did not yet know he was going to let himself be happy. It was a Tuesday, a little before 7. He was on his back under the number 4 bus with a glow plug in one hand and a stubborn connector in the other, and he heard the side door of the shop open the way he had started to notice it opening, which was to say he noticed who it was before he saw her. "I got an extra coffee," Nora Vale said, from somewhere above the front axle. "They gave me 2 by mistake." "They always give you 2 by mistake," Levi said. "3rd day in a row." "It is a very careless coffee shop," she said. He rolled out from under the bus, wiped his hands on a rag that only moved the grease around, and stood up. She was leaning against the workbench in a good wool coat that did not belong in a diesel shop, holding 2 cups, and she was not looking at the coffee. On the corner of the toolbox, where it had hung for 2 years, was a small felt keychain shaped like a wrench, stitched in uneven 8-year-old stitches. Nora had noticed it on the first morning and had not asked. That was one of the things he was starting to like about her, that she did not ask about the things a person carried until the person was ready to set them down. Something sat in the air between them that neither of them had said out loud. It had been sitting there for 3 weeks, since the night everything he had spent 10 years keeping quiet had been said in front of 200 people. Before you go any further, stay with this one to the end. The person who finally stood up and said his name out loud is not the one you are going to expect. Because 3 weeks earlier, Levi Hartman had almost not gone to the reunion at all. He owned 1 good shirt and 1 pair of dress shoes, and the shoes had a split across the left toe that he had glued and stitched himself with waxed thread from the shop. He did not see the point of showing either of those things to people who had decided a long time ago who he was and had not checked their work since. To understand him, you have to understand the mornings, because the mornings were where his whole life actually happened. At 6, he was awake before the alarm. At 6:15, he was standing in the doorway of a small room with a paper solar system taped to the ceiling, watching an 8-year-old pretend to still be asleep. Junie Hartman had her mother's stubborn chin and her mother's habit of hiding a smile against the pillow, and every single morning Levi felt the same 2 things at once, which were how much he missed Ruth and how completely this child had saved his life without knowing it. "Bus in 40 minutes, he said. "Waffle or the other waffle." "The other waffle," she said, eyes still shut. He made the other waffle. He braided her hair badly, and she corrected it in the mirror without complaint, because she had learned that his hands were built for engines and not for hair, and she had decided a long time ago to love the braids anyway. He zipped her backpack and clipped the felt wrench to the strap, and she touched it the way she touched it every morning, a small habit that had started the winter Ruth got sick and had never stopped. "Is your truck going to start today?" she asked, not really a question. "My truck always starts," he said. "I am a professional." It started on the 2nd try. He dropped her at the corner where the bus came, watched until the door folded shut behind her, and only then drove to the shop. The shop was called Dabney & Son, though the son had moved to the city years ago and never came back, and Gray Dabney, who was 60 and shaped like a man who had spent 40 years bent over engines, mostly let Levi run the place now. That morning, Gray was standing by the office with a message slip in his hand and an expression Levi did not like. "Reunion committee called the shop," Gray said. "Looking for you. Said your college class, 10 years, woman named Ballard was very persistent." "They can be persistent at the shop all they want," Levi said, and took the bus key off the board. "You should go," Gray said. "You never go anywhere but the school and here." "I go to the hardware store." "That is not a life, Levi. That is a route." Levi did not answer that, because the truest things Gray said were usually the ones you could not argue with. so he went and got under the volunteer fire department's 20-year-old pumper instead, which was the one machine in the county nobody else could keep alive, and he let the argument end the way their arguments always ended, with him under something and Gray talking to his boots. The pumper was a good example of the thing nobody in that reunion hall would ever have understood about him. 2 companies in the city had looked at it and quoted the fire district a number to replace it, because replacing it was easier than fixing a design that had been discontinued for 15 years. Levi had kept it running for 6 of those years on parts he machined himself and a knowledge of its temper that no manual contained. When it went out on a call at 2 in the morning and came back, some family somewhere had a house because a man in torn shoes had refused to let an old engine die. He did not think of it in those terms. He thought of it as a Tuesday. Fire chief called too, Gray added, from over by the office. Wanted to know if you were the one taking it apart or one of those city outfits. I told him you. He said good. He said he does not let anyone else touch it. Gray let that sit. Funny. A whole fire district trusts you with the truck that saves their lives, and you will not put on a good shirt for a room full of people who forgot your name. The truck does not laugh at my shoes, Levi said, and that was the end of that. He tucked the reunion invitation behind the shop clock, where the old parts orders went to be forgotten, and he meant for it to stay there. To know why the invitation frightened him, you have to go back 10 years, to a night in January of 2016, when Levi Hartman was 21 years old and still believed his life was going to be large. He was finishing a 2-year engineering and diesel technology program, top of his class in the shop work, and there was a co-op placement that everybody in the program wanted. It was the kind of placement that turned into a career, a real one, the kind with a title and a future. The final interviews were in the city on a Friday evening. Levi had a good suit borrowed from a cousin and a full tank of gas and a plan. He never made the interview. There had been freezing rain all afternoon, and the county highway had turned to glass. And Levi, who worked part-time driving a wrecker to pay for the program, was the closest thing to help when a van came over the rise too fast and rolled twice and ended on its roof in the ditch with the wheels still turning. He was 200 yards back when it happened. He remembered the sound more than the sight. There were 4 people in that van. One of them was a 15-year-old boy named Peter Vale. Levi did what the wrecker had taught him and what nobody teaches you. He cut the battery so it would not spark in the leaking fuel. He braced the roof with a jack and a length of pipe so it would not settle further. He got the door open with a bar and his own weight, and he crawled half inside and kept a boy from moving a neck that should not be moved, and he kept an older woman talking who wanted very badly to stop, and he did that for about 40 minutes in the cold while the volunteer crew fought their way up an iced highway to reach him. 3 of the 4 people in that van lived. The 4th had been gone before Levi ever reached them, and he carried that too, quietly, the way he carried everything. By the time the ambulances left, it was after 9. The interview had been at 7. He had not called, because there had been no moment in those 40 minutes to call, and afterward it had seemed obscene to explain to a placement committee that he had missed his future because he was holding a stranger's head still in a ditch. He drove home in the borrowed suit with someone else's blood on the sleeve, and he told no one why he had not gone. The placement went to the next name on the list, which was Vanessa Croy, and the story that grew up around the empty chair was simpler and meaner than the truth. Levi Hartman had choked. Levi Hartman had flaked. Levi Hartman, who had been so sure of himself, had not even bothered to show. He never corrected it. Correcting it would have meant explaining, and explaining would have meant asking for something. And he had decided, at 21, in a cold car, that he would rather be thought small than ask anyone to think him large. He stayed in town. He met a woman named Ruth who laughed at his bad braids before there was even a child to braid for, and he married her, and they had Junie, and for 6 years the size of his life stopped mattering because the life was full. Then Ruth got sick, and then Ruth was gone, in the spring of 2024, and Levi was 30 years old with a 6-year-old and a felt wrench, and a pair of shoes he kept reselling because new ones were for people who had money left at the end of the month. He had traded one night for a career he never got to have, and he had never once told anyone the price. It did not feel like a sacrifice to him. It felt like the only thing a person could have done. He had told Ruth a version of it once, early on, lying in the dark the way you tell the truest things. Even then, he had trimmed it down. He had said there was an accident, and he had stopped to help, and it had cost him an interview, and he had let her believe the interview was a small thing, because he did not want to be a man she felt sorry for. Ruth had gone quiet in the dark, and then she had put her hand flat on his chest and said, "That was not a small thing, Levi." And he had said it was a long time ago, and she had said, "That is not the same as small." He had loved her more in that moment than he knew how to say. She was the only person alive who had understood the size of it. And then she was not alive. And the size of it went back to being a stone only he could feel. So when Junie found the invitation behind the clock, because children find everything, and asked in her careful voice whether he would wear the one good shirt so she could see it, he looked at her face and he said yes. He said yes for her. That was the only reason he ever said yes to anything anymore. The reunion was held in a banquet hall on the edge of town that had been a grange, and was now rented out for weddings and funerals, and the occasional class trying to prove to itself that 10 years had been kind. Levi arrived late on purpose and parked his truck at the far end of the lot, next to the newer cars, and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Then he went in the good shirt and the reseled shoes, and the first thing that happened was that the room did what rooms had always done, which was to sort itself in the first 10 seconds into who mattered and who did not. Cynthia Ballard, who had organized the whole thing and wore a lanyard like a badge of office, found him at the door with a name tag already printed. "Levi," she said, surprised in a way she did not hide. "You came. We honestly did not think you would." "My daughter wanted to see the shirt," he said, which was true, and which Cynthia clearly did not know what to do with. So she pointed him at the bar and moved on to someone whose life was easier to summarize. He got a soda and stood near the wall, which was where he intended to spend the entire evening, and that was where he was standing when he saw Nora Vale for the first time in 10 years. He knew her the way you know a face that has been in the back of your mind without your permission. She was the keynote speaker, it turned out. There was a folded program on every table with her name on it, and a title under it, founder and director of a regional air ambulance service, and a small line that said the service had flown more than 2,000 rescue missions since it began. He had not known the founder of that service was her. He had not let himself follow the story of anyone from that year, because the story of that year had a ditch in the middle of it. She crossed the room toward the coat table, and for a moment they were standing near each other with a rack of wool between them, and something passed over her face that he could not read. "You never RSVP'd," she said. "I checked twice." "I do not RSVP to much," he said. "No," she said, looking at him a beat too long. "I imagine you do not." "You look well," she said, which was the kind of thing people said, except she said it like she meant the opposite of small talk, like she was checking a fact she had worried about. "I look like a man who works for a living," he said. "You look like the program said you would, founder and director. That is a long way from the back row of Professor Hall's 8 o'clock. "I hated that class," she said, and almost smiled. And for a moment the 10 years thinned to nothing, and they were just two people who had once known the same tired mornings. Then something crossed her face again, the same thing he could not read, and she straightened. "I have to go get ready," she said. "I am the entertainment tonight, apparently." She paused. "Do not leave early, Levi. I know you were going to. Do not." He did not answer, which they both understood as the answer. She had a leather folder under one arm, held close, the way you hold something you have carried a long distance. Now, here's the thing to keep in your mind as this goes on. Guess what was in that folder? Keep your guess, because it matters. Across the room, a woman in an expensive dress was watching them both. Vanessa Croy had done well, or had arranged the evening so that it looked as though she had done well, which in a room like that is the same currency. She saw Levi, she saw the shoes, and she smiled the way she used to smile, the small private smile of a person who has found something to enjoy. It happened over the second hour, the way these things happen, at the worst possible moment, which is to say when the most people were listening. There was a lull between the dinner and the speech, and people had drifted between tables, and Levi had made the mistake of sitting down at a table near the middle because Marion Teasdale, a quiet woman he half remembered, had waved him into an empty chair with what looked like genuine kindness. He was talking to no one in particular about nothing in particular when Vanessa Croy arrived at the table with 2 other people and a glass of wine and a decade of practice. "Levi Hartman," she said, loud enough that the nearby tables turned. "I did not believe it when Cynthia said you were here. Look at you. You have not changed at all." "Hello, Vanessa," he said. "Still in town," she said. "Still turning wrenches. That is so wonderful. It is so grounding, honestly, to see someone who just, stayed. Someone has to keep the buses running," he said mildly. Her eyes went down to his feet then, slow, so that everyone could follow them, and she let her smile widen. "Are those the same shoes?" she said. "They cannot be. Levi, tell me those are not the same torn shoes you wore to graduation." The table laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that the laugh had a shape, and the shape had him at the center of it. Levi looked down at his own feet, at the split across the left toe that he had stitched with waxed thread, and then he looked back up. And he did not say what he could have said. He did not say that he had held a boy's head in a ditch on the night she thought he had choked. He did not say that the shoes cost less than one of her earrings and had done more good in the world. He said nothing at all, because a scene would have followed him home to a small room with a solar system on the ceiling, and he would not bring that home. "Some of us built something," Vanessa said, warming to it, playing the table now. "And some of us are still turning wrenches. There is no shame in it, really." At the edge of the table, Marion Teasdale had gone very pale and very still, and she was looking at Levi with an expression that had nothing to do with the joke. An expression like a person hearing a door open onto a room she had locked a long time ago. But she said nothing either, and her silence and his silence sat side by side at that table, 2 very different weights. Levi stood and picked his coat up off the back of the chair and got ready to leave early, the way he always left, quietly, before the part of the evening where someone might be tempted to be honest. He got as far as the coat table. He was halfway into his coat when Nora Vale stepped in front of him, and there was nothing casual about it. She had put the wine down somewhere. She still had the leather folder. "Do not go," she said, low, just for him. "It is a school night," he said. "My daughter waits up." "Levi." She said his name like it cost her something. "I need to say something in there, about that night, about the highway, and I'm asking you first because I owe you at least that. Let me say your name." Something in his chest closed like a hand. "No," he said. "Levi, 3 people are alive because of you. My brother is one of them. Peter. He was 15. You held his head so he would not move, and you kept my mother talking, And then you drove away before anyone could ask who you were, and I have spent 10 years trying to find you." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "I found out that 2 months ago it was you. 2 months. And then I saw your name on this class list and I could not breathe." He had known, somewhere, that this was coming, from the moment he saw the folder. It did not make it easier. "Let them think what they think," he said. "It never fed my kid, either way. I do not want it, Nora. I did not do it to be found." "I know you did not." She stepped closer. "But you do not get to decide what I owe. You have been carrying this quietly for 10 years like it belongs to you alone. It does not. It belongs to my brother, too. And he asked me if I ever found you, to make sure the whole world knew your name. If you were Levi, standing there with one arm in your coat and the door 20 feet away, would you have turned around? Keep your answer, because he made his, and it was not the one he expected of himself. He did not turn around. He did not say yes. He simply stood there, unable to make his legs carry him out the door, while Nora Vale looked at him one more second, and then turned and walked not after him but toward the podium. Cynthia Ballard had been about to introduce the keynote speaker. Nora reached the microphone before she could, and took it gently out of her hands, and Cynthia, sensing something, stepped back. "I had a speech," Nora said to the room. "It was about the last 10 years and how far we have all come. I am not going to give it." The room settled the way rooms do when they realize something real is happening. "Most of you know what I do," she said. "I run an air ambulance service. We fly to people on the worst day of their lives, and we try to reach them faster than the roads allow. 2,000 missions. 2,000 missions. I have been thanked in a lot of rooms for building it." She paused. "I did not build it. I built it because of a night 10 years ago in January on the county highway, when it was iced over, and a van rolled with my family in it." Levi had stopped by the coat table. He could not have said why he did not leave. He stood there with his coat half on. "My brother Peter was 15, Nora said. "The first vehicle reached us in about 40 minutes, because that is how long the roads took that night. 40 minutes is a very long time to be upside down in a ditch. My brother should not have survived it. My mother should not have survived it." Her voice held. "They did, because before the ambulance, before the fire crew, before anyone whose job it was, there was already a young man there. He was driving a wrecker. He cut our battery so we would not burn. He braced the roof with a jack so it would not crush us. He got the door open, and he held my brother's head still with his own hands, in the cold, for 40 minutes, and he kept my mother talking when she wanted to stop. And then, when the crews arrived and took over, he stepped back into the dark and drove away, and he never gave anyone his name." She looked out at the tables. Vanessa Croy was very still now. "I spent 10 years trying to find him. I found him 2 months ago." Nora opened the leather folder. "His name was in a program that year. He was supposed to be at a co-op interview in the city that Friday at 7 o'clock. He never went. For 10 years the story in this class has been that he choked, that he flaked, that he did not bother to show." She lifted a single page. "This is the county incident log from that night. The call came in at 6:51. He was on that highway, on his back under a stranger's van, at the exact minute he was supposed to be selling himself to a committee. He did not choke. He gave it up, and he let you all believe the worst thing for 10 years, rather than ask a single one of you to think better of him." She lifted her head and found him by the coats. "The man some of you were laughing at an hour ago is the reason my brother is alive. His name is Levi Hartman, and I would like him to come up here so that this class can look at him properly, one time, before we all go home." The room turned. 200 faces turned all at once toward a man in a good shirt and torn shoes standing by a rack of coats, and into the silence, before Levi could move, a chair scraped. Marion Teasdale stood up, shaking, at the middle table. "I was in the third car," Marion said, too loud, the way you speak when you have held something too long. "I saw all of it. I was 15, too, and I froze in my seat and I could not move. And he ran past my window toward the fire. I have known for 10 years, and I never said, because I was ashamed I had done nothing. I am sorry, Levi. I am so sorry I let them say what they said." Levi walked to the front because there was nothing else left to do, and it was the longest walk of his life, longer than the ditch. And Nora met him at the edge of the little stage and did not touch him, only stood beside him so he would not be alone up there. What happened to Vanessa Croy happened quietly, which is the only way that kind of thing should happen. The co-op timeline was on the page too, and it was very plain. The placement had gone to the next name on the list when Levi withdrew. The next name had been hers. And she had known, because everyone in the program that spring had known where Levi was that Friday. It had been in the county paper. A young record driver credited by the fire chief. No name given at his request. Vanessa had put it together like anyone could have, and she had said nothing, because the empty chair was more useful to her, filled with a story about a man who choked than with the truth about a man who did not. She tried, once, to speak. She stood at her table and said something about how she had not known, not for certain, how could anyone have known? And the words went out into a room that was no longer laughing and found nothing to hold on to. Nobody argued with her. That was the worst of it, for her. Nobody argued. They simply looked, and then, one by one, they looked away. And a woman who had spent an evening arranging herself at the center of the room discovered that the center had moved and taken the light with it. She got her coat. She left. The door closed behind her, and the room did not so much forgive her as forget her, which is a colder thing, and she carried it out into the parking lot alone. Marion Teasdale was still standing, still crying, and Levi came down off the little stage and went to her first, before anyone could shake his hand, because that was the person in the room who was actually in pain. "I was 15 and scared," Marion said. "I froze. You didn't." "You were a kid in a wreck," Levi said. "You froze because you were a child, and it was the worst night of your life. That is not a crime, Marion. You do not owe me 10 years of guilt. Put it down." "How do you just," she said, and could not finish. "Practice," he said, and it was almost a joke, and she laughed through the crying, which was the kindest thing he could have done for her. And he meant it to be. The hierarchy that had walked into that room 3 hours earlier, all its rankings printed on invisible name tags, had rearranged itself completely, and it had not required a single raised voice to do it. He drove home under a clear, cold sky, with the heater ticking, and his hands loose on the wheel for the first time in years. The house was dark, except for the porch light he always left on. The sitter left. He looked in on Junie, who was asleep in a diagonal across the bed the way she always was, one hand near the edge as though she had fallen asleep reaching for something. And he stood in the doorway under the paper solar system for a while, and just breathed. In the kitchen, he sat down at the table and did not turn on the big light. The one good shirt was over the back of the chair. The felt wrench, which had come off her backpack that morning for a repair to its loop, sat on the table where he had left it, waiting for a stitch. He picked it up and turned it over in his fingers. For 10 years, he had believed a private arithmetic, which was that what he had done on the highway only counted, only stayed clean if he never mentioned it. The moment he spoke it aloud, it would become a thing he was using, a coin he was spending, and it would stop being the pure thing it had been in the cold. So he had kept it in his chest like a stone, and he had let the stone make him quiet, and he had called the quiet humility when a good part of it had just been fear. Sitting in the dark of his own kitchen, with his daughter asleep down the hall and a stranger's gratitude still ringing in his ears, he let himself wonder, for the first time, whether being seen and being good might be the same thing and not opposites, whether he had been protecting the good deed all these years or just hiding from the size of it. His phone lit up on the table. A text from a number he had put in that night and told himself he would not use. Nora. Made it home okay? He looked at it a long time. Then he typed, Junie is asleep. I am at the kitchen table fixing a keychain. Long day. The reply came fast. Can I call you tomorrow? Not about that night, about something else. He wrote, yes. Then he set the phone down and picked the needle back up, and he stitched the loop of the felt wrench closed under the low light. Badly, the way he did everything with his hands that was not an engine, and he fell asleep at the table before he finished, and the porch light stayed on over an empty street, keeping its small watch the way it always had. Nora called the next day, and the day after that, and by the end of the week she had stopped pretending the coffees were extras. The something else turned out to be a real offer, and she made it plainly, sitting on an upturned crate in the shop while Levi worked, because she had learned already that he listened better with his hands busy. The service is growing, she said. We have 4 aircraft and 2 ground rigs and a maintenance contract with an outfit 2 counties over that treats us like an afterthought. Things break and we wait, and when we wait, people on the worst day of their lives wait too. I want my own shop. I want a lead mechanic and a foreman who understands that a machine we neglect is a person we do not reach. She looked at him. I have interviewed 9 people. None of them held my brother's head in a ditch. You cannot hire a man because of one night, Levi said. That is not how you build a shop. You build it on the boring years, not the one bad hour. I am not hiring you for the one night, she said. I looked into the boring years too. I called your fire chief, I called Gray, I called the school district transportation office, and a man there talked about you for 10 minutes without taking a breath. Do you know what all 3 of them said, in almost the same words? They said, if Levi tells you it is fixed, and if Levi tells you it cannot be trusted yet, you do not fly it. That is the whole job, Levi. That is the entire job in one sentence, and you have apparently been doing it for free your whole life. She spread her hands. I am just offering to stop the free part. That is not a qualification, Levi said, under the bus. It is exactly the qualification, she said. It is the only one I actually care about. He rolled out and looked at her. He thought about the co-op interview he never made, and the 10 years of mornings, and how strange it was that the future had driven all the way back around to find him in the same shop, in the same shoes, and this time had asked instead of judged. I have one condition, he said. Name it. 3 o'clock, I am at the school. Every day. I do not care what is broken. Whatever the job is, it releases me at 2:45, so I can be standing at that fence when the doors open, because there is a person in this world who has already lost one parent and is not going to spend her afternoons watching for a truck that comes late. He wiped his hands. That is the whole negotiation. Everything else you can have. Nora was quiet for a second, and then she smiled, and it was not the careful smile from the reunion, it was something younger. That, she said, is the easiest yes I have ever given. Junie met her properly on a Saturday at the shop and studied her the way 8-year-olds study anyone their father looks at twice. Nora did not perform for her, did not crouch and use the bright voice adults use on children. She just handed Junie a rag and asked her to hold a light steady, and the 2 of them worked on a stubborn fitting for 20 minutes, while Levi pretended to be busy at the bench and watched the whole thing in the reflection of a chrome hubcap. At the end, Junie clipped the freshly repaired felt wrench back onto her own backpack, and then she looked at Nora, and then she looked at her father, and she said, to no one in particular, "She is not bad at holding the light." Which, from Junie, was a coronation, and Levi had to turn back to the bench for a second so that neither of them would see his face. He had spent 2 years afraid of exactly this moment, of a woman his daughter might have to make room for, and here it had arrived looking like a kid and a grown woman agreeing that a fitting was stubborn. Later, in the doorway of the shop with the morning coming up gold over the lot, Nora's hand found his, and he let it, and that was all it was and all it needed to be. He was not a man who rushed things. He had waited 10 years to be seen. He could take the rest slowly and mean every day of it. The shoes wore all the way through that winter, the left one first, the split finally running past the point where waxed thread could hold it. And one cold morning, Levi looked at them, really looked, and set them by the back door, and did not resole them again. By spring, there was a new hangar on the north edge of the county, with a maintenance bay inside it that had his name over the door, though he had asked them not to and been overruled. And the county's 20-year-old fire pumpers still came to him, too, because some things you do not hand off just because your life got larger. On the days a rescue flew, Levi was the last set of hands on the aircraft before it lifted, and the first when it came home. And he checked every rivet like there was a boy's head resting somewhere inside it, because as far as he was concerned, there always was. Junie's felt wrench hung from the rearview mirror of his truck now, retired from backpack duty, swaying a little every time the engine turned over on the first try, the way it always did, because he was a professional. Some evenings Nora waited for him in the hangar doorway with the light behind her, and some evenings he waited for her, and it did not much matter which, because there was always a light on for the other one now. And that was the entire point of a home, he had decided, that someone leaves the light. The town did not remember him in the end, for the night he vanished into the dark and drove away without his name. It remembered him for every ordinary morning after, the trucks that started, the buses that ran, the aircraft that came home, the man at the school fence at 3 o'clock in shoes that finally, at long last, were new. The hangar light held steady over the valley, and the truck turned up the road toward it, and inside the cab a small felt wrench swung once and went still.